Elite police forces storm a neighborhood. The streets are filled with desperation. Food is scarce, electricity's been out for weeks, and fear lingers in the air. The people watch in silence, wary of the heavily armed officers. They know what's coming. The government has received intelligence that community leaders have spoken out against the dear leader. That alone is enough to seal their fate. One by one, the police open fire, executing people who dared oppose them. Anyone who protests, shields a friend, or even cries out in horror meets the same brutal end. Are we in North Korea? No, because there are in fact many dictatorships that may even be worse than the Hermit Kingdom, and we'll be visiting them on today's episode of the Infographic Show. Dictatorships even worse than North Korea. Number 9. King Mswati III, Eswatini. At just 18 years old while attending public school in the UK, Mswati got the call he'd been waiting for. His time had come. He was to return home and officially take the throne of Eswatini, then known as Swaziland. His father had passed away 4 years earlier, and while his aunts had ruled in his place, the country was now ready for its new king, and Mswati was ready to rule. As usually happens in these stories, the people of Eswatini had a brief window of hope that King Mswati III would be a benevolent ruler, kinder than those who had come before. And as is also usual in these stories, they were deeply, deeply disappointed. King Mswati III turned out to be both hopelessly corrupt and a strict religious fundamentalist, at least when it comes to other people's behavior. To enforce his strict brand of Christian fundamentalism, Mswati had banned a wide range of activities in his country, from miniskirts to divorce and sex for girls under 18, though this particular ban was only enforced between 2001 and 2005. Of course, there are exceptions for King Mswati himself. He currently has 15 wives and 36 children. At least a few of those wives were taken from their families and married off while they were in high school, with perhaps less than enthusiastic consent. However, to hold himself a little bit accountable for his own indiscretions, King Mswati III decided to punish himself with a fine. Specifically, he gave up one cow. And what is he doing for his economy, you might ask? Well, the answer is nothing good. While the average wage in Eswatini is 55,220 SCL a year, around $3,000 a year, King Mswatini himself is living a pretty nice life. To start with, he's a car guy, so he decided to buy himself 19 Rolls-Royces and 120 BMWs, worth a total of around $19 million. Some citizens were weirdly aggravated by him collecting fleets of luxury cars, while 59% of the country lived in poverty. And Mswatini got annoyed with this, so to punish those dissenters for, well, being poor, he banned people from taking pictures of his cars. That way, no one could complain that his $500,000 Daimler Chrysler Maybach 62 could be sold to help 1/3 of the Eswatini residents in need of food assistance. To further shield himself from criticism, complaints, and accusations of corruption, King Mswatini III took drastic measures. He abolished independent media, banned freedom of speech, assembly and association, and outlawed political parties, especially those daring to suggest that maybe King Mswatini III isn't a good ruler. Anyone who thinks otherwise is in trouble. In January 2023, human rights lawyer Thulani Maseko was shot in front of his family by unknown gunmen who definitely had no relation whatsoever to King Mswatini III. When students decided to protest his regime in 2021, he quashed the situation violently. Amnesty International estimated that at least 80 students were killed. But compared to some other people on the list, King Mswatini seems almost benign. Number 8. Ismael Omar Gella, Djibouti. Djibouti is a small coastal country on the Horn of Africa, and since May of 1999 it's been ruled with an iron fist by Ismael Omar Gella, the former head of national security who took over the role of president from his uncle. Now, to be fair, Gella has had elections, or as opposition politician Dr. Dar Ahmed Farah calls them, an election-like event, since he came to power in 1999. In 2021, he won 98.58% of the vote after opposition parties boycotted what they considered a sham. Now that leaves us with some serious doubts about how fair Djibouti's electoral process is. International groups had the same questions, and their investigation into the matter did not yield great answers. When looking into freedom of the press in Djibouti, Reporters Without Borders found that the country ranks 176 out of 180 in terms of press freedom. Freedom House ranked Djibouti as not free, using authoritarian means to maintain its dominant position. According to the East African, Gella's government controls all media and the majority of the opposition has been driven into exile or underground. In 2023, Gella's party won 58 out of 65 seats in Djibouti's National Assembly. And Djibouti's repressive dictatorship hasn't only hurt the country politically, its people are suffering in dire poverty all while Gella hoards wealth for himself, as the numbers for the economy in Djibouti don't add up. From 1996 to 2024, poverty in Djibouti increased from 41%, already a pretty horrible number, to over 70%. Over 40% of population lives in extreme poverty. But the thing is, Djibouti should be doing much better financially. It's home to one of the biggest ports in the area. The port of Djibouti on the Red Sea connects Europe and Africa to the Middle East, and it's a major stop for refueling and cargo. But it's also home to military bases from 5 different countries that pay their rent directly to the government. The country makes over $1.5 billion per year from port fees for Ethiopia alone, since Ethiopia is a landlocked country and must use Djibouti for its imports and exports. It makes $125 million from leasing land to foreign military bases. The country only has a population of 1.1 million people and is considered a middle-income country, so why hasn't any of this income helped people? Djibouti is still ranked 166 out of 189 on the Human Development Index, an index measuring overall welfare of the population. Malnutrition, poor sanitation, and diseases like malaria and cholera run rampant throughout the country. Where is all the money going? Well, it turns out, into Gella's pockets. Though he is hardly the biggest dictator and thief on our list, Gella takes everything he can from the proceeds of businesses in Djibouti for himself. In January 2004, the American embassy in Djibouti sent Washington, D.C. the following message: Djibouti is less a country than a commercial state city controlled by one man, Ismael Omar Gella. In a perhaps not a coincidence turn of events, 2 of Djibouti's biggest multimillionaires, Abdirahman Berde, who built his fortune in port services and tobacco, the founder of conglomerate GSK Group, have both fled the country after falling out with the president, which of course led to him allegedly needing to confiscate some of their assets. While operating an entire country for the ruler's financial benefit while the people starve is a very North Korean-coded thing, things are not much better for Djibouti's neighbor. Number 7. Isaias Awerki, Eritrea. Known as that strip of land blocking Ethiopia from the sea, Eritrea is a former Italian colony and current poverty-stricken dictatorship run since 1993 by Isaias Awerki. While you could argue if Awerki or Kim Jong-un's rule is worse, Eritrea has been called Africa's North Korea, so at least they're competitive. And one look at the daily goings-on within the country make it clear why. Besides the obvious similarities, Awerki rules with a totalitarian system, there is no free press and only one party. There is arguably even worse repression happening within the borders of Eritrea. It didn't start out that way. When Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia through a referendum in 1993, Isaias Awerki was hailed as a revolutionary hero. He had led the Eritrean People's Liberation Front during the 1973 Ethiopian Revolution. However, once he was appointed head of state, things quickly went downhill. He changed his revolutionary organization to the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, the PFDJ, and kept it as the only party within the Eritrean government. Though elections were supposed to be held in 1997, 4 years after his ascent to power, Awerki decided to cancel them instead. In 2001, he decided that having journalists reporting on him was also pretty annoying, so he shut down the national press, marking his country's full transition into authoritarianism. Since then, the UN has found human rights abuses ranging from torture and executions to state-sanctioned assault. In order to compel his citizens to do the government's bidding, Awerki operates a system of forced conscription, and not just for the military. At the dawn of Eritrean independence, Awerki enacted a policy of mandatory conscription in which every adult under the age of 55 would have to serve in the military for 18 months. His reasoning being that since Ethiopia and Eritrea have had a tense relationship since the latter declared independence from Ethiopia, Eritrea needs to be war-ready. But then, Awerki decided that wasn't enough. He extended the length of conscription for a time to be determined, which means that some Eritreans have now been in forced service to the state for decades. In addition, he expanded conscription to include forced labor in construction, agriculture, and government administration for all Eritrean men, women, and even children. There is now a nationwide labor force of people akin to indentured servants, working against their will for obscenely low wages. The average salary for conscripts is about 450 nakfa, or $30 a month, with no end in sight. Between 1993 and 2003, Awerki's administration focused on creating a militaristic regime, spending an average of 24.9% of Eritrea's GDP on the military, all while his people suffered. The World Bank Group estimates that 70% of Eritreans live below the poverty line, and since many of them have no choice as to where or how to work, the citizens' economic situation doesn't look like it'll improve anytime soon. This has created a horrific domestic situation that many Eritreans understandably want to flee. Unfortunately, this is where the violent nature of Awerki's government comes to the forefront, as soldiers have orders to shoot to kill any Eritreans they see trying to cross the border out of the country. Number 6. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Equatorial Guinea. Now, if you think you have a complicated relationship with your family, wait till you hear about the Obiang dynasty ruling Equatorial Guinea. Obiang started in politics in his uncle's, Francisco Macias Nguema's regime, who became the first president after independence in 1968. Macias's rule was absolutely brutal, and Obiang gladly took part in it. As well as several consulting and military positions within the government, he also ran the country's infamous prison. But when Macias put Obiang's brother to death, Obiang decided enough was enough. If anyone was going to systematically be violating the rights of the people of Equatorial Guinea, it was going to be him. He led a violent coup against his uncle on August 3, 1979, and he had him executed the next month. To many citizens, it might have seemed that Obiang was different at first. He created a new constitution in 1982 with the help of the UN Human Rights Commission. Another constitution followed in 1991 that included multi-party politics. But both those documents gave him incredibly far-reaching powers, and the 1991 paper revoked the few human rights Equatorial Guinea still had. It also guaranteed Obiang political asylum during his entire time as president, which would prove to be a long time. In fact, Obiang has had one of the longest tenures in the world outside of Queen Elizabeth II, ruling Equatorial Guinea for over 45 years as of this episode. Though he has held elections, international groups monitoring them have dismissed them as a joke, full of intimidation and coercion, leading to Obiang securing over 93% of the vote multiple times. In the meantime, when oil and gas deposits were found in Equatorial Guinea in the 1990s, some people thought this would pull citizens out of poverty. Surprisingly, it didn't end up helping the people at all. But Obiang and his family, particularly one of his sons, Teodoro, definitely got their share of the profits. Other countries have conducted investigations into Obiang for embezzlement, money laundering, and misuse of public funds. In response, Obiang shrugged and went back to arresting, torturing, and disappearing people who opposed him. Oh, did we mention the torture? Yeah, Obiang is horrifically a huge fan of it. Under his rule, police forces arrest opposition members or anyone who dislikes Obiang. They then hang them by their hands and their feet, or in sacks, where they are beaten and humiliated for hours. Others are subjected to electric shocks and suffocation. Women and children aren't exempt. Some of the worst government retaliations have been against the Bubi people, a group indigenous to Bioko Island. A group of Bubi launched attacks on a military barracks and were then tortured until they confessed. Police made Bubi women swim through the mud in the prison courtyard, assaulting them in front of the other prisoners to completely break and humiliate them. When the country hosted the African Cup of Nations soccer tournament in early 2015, many felt it was an opportunity to bring attention to the plight of the people. Peaceful protests took place in the capital, Malabo, and as a result, authorities arrested 300 young people, including dozens of children, who were each given 20 to 30 lashes. And our next dictator knows a thing or two about crushing protests. Number 5. Alexander Lukashenko, Belarus. Many people associate repressive dictatorial regimes in Eastern Europe with Russia, but it turns out there are worse, like Alexander Lukashenko's regime in Belarus. On one Reddit thread, a user asked if it's worse to live under Putin or Lukashenko in terms of totalitarianism, and Belarusians immediately answered, "We have by far more repressions and less freedom. We are poorer and the government hates us." Another said, "In Belarus, danger even to answer this question." A veteran of the Soviet Army and Border Guards, Lukashenko was fairly elected for the first and only time to the office of the president. Unlike most former Soviet bloc countries, he insisted on keeping ties with Russia and avoiding the shock therapy economics that sent many Eastern European economies spiraling. Instead, he maintained state control of many industries, and Belarus avoided some of the economic downturns of neighboring nations. So he started off on a good and rather popular foot with his people. He was also well liked for being a man of the people, speaking their language in his speeches and promising to root out corruption in the government. But then he decided corruption seemed pretty fun, so he gave himself the power to dismiss the Supreme Council, Belarus's legislature at the time, whenever he wanted to. In 1996, he held a referendum that expanded his powers aggressively. Some outside government groups, like the Belarusian Helsinki Committee, had issues with how the referendum was held. For example, Lukashenko removed the chairman of the Central Commission for Elections and National Referendums, Viktor Hanchar, before the referendum took place. The man who would be checking on the legality and fairness of the voting was gone. When early voting began, polling stations still didn't have the proposed amendments to give to the voters. This meant that citizens were forced to vote on things that they hadn't read. The exiled Rada of the Belarusian Democratic Republic, a former governing body of the country, said this in 2016. The illegal referendums became a formal cover for the final destruction of the democratic achievements of Belarus in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The society and the parliament of Belarus were deprived of control over the executive branch of state government. This was just step one of Lukashenko's plan. Since then, he has suppressed opposition and thrown over 1,400 political opponents in jail. To hold on to his power, he has created a powerful cult of personality as a humble strongman, making Belarus's state film studio produce a movie about him and having school children visit all the sites associated with his life. After he held one of the most rigged elections of all in 2020, protests erupted across Belarus. Lukashenko went on an arresting and assaulting spree against anyone who dared question the fairness of his elections. He won fair and square, after he sentenced his opponent Serhiy Tsikhanovsky to 18 years in jail. He also threw another political opponent, Viktor Babariko, into prison for good measure as well. But he didn't stop there. Anyone who opposed him or simply expressed hope for democracy in Belarus, including media consultant and blogger Ihar Losik and Katsiarina Andreeva and artist Maria Kalesnikava, were labeled terrorists and also thrown into prison. Thousands of Belarusians fled the country to avoid the wrath of Lukashenko's regime. The elections were so unfair that the United States, UK, and EU refused to recognize Lukashenko's regime as the official government of Belarus any longer and imposed sanctions on his country. Since then, Lukashenko's cracked down on the opposition even more. Even the elites and those within his regime are no longer safe from his wrath. In 2023, Lukashenko declared that the death penalty would be imposed for high treason, delivered by a single shot to the back of the head. Though as you'll see, some upcoming regimes are even bigger fans of the death penalty. One insider who remained anonymous, presumably to avoid being shot in the back of the head, said everyone tries to stay out of trouble and not stand out. Officials from ambassadors to transport ministers have been detained, interrogated, and in some cases tortured. Many of them were found dead later. The iron fist that Lukashenko crushes his country with has led many to call him Europe's last dictator, a clearly outdated title left over from happier, simpler times. While an obviously authoritarian regime is scary, other dictators go to great lengths to make their regimes seem progressive, and that can actually make them more dangerous than most, which brings us to number 4. Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia. Since Mohammed bin Salman became Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, he has tried to portray himself as the progressive prince. He has opened up Saudi Arabia to tourism and encouraged international investment and events. He's even promised to repeal some of the country's more oppressive laws against women. But something dark sits under this illusion of progress. Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, has consolidated his power to a frightening extent and is even interfering abroad. One of his first acts was to create an anti-corruption committee and promise to root out corruption, a common theme so far. In order to do that, he assembled the richest, most powerful Saudi citizens, including many members of his own family, at a Ritz-Carlton hotel. And by assembled, we mean arrested. Strangely, he didn't include himself with a personal worth of $25 billion or King Salman with a personal net worth of $18 billion in answering for any potential corruption charges. But MBS cared less about rooting out corruption than making sure that any potential rival would bow down to him. He even detained his cousin, a former crown prince, and the king's brother to make sure that they would pose no threat to his rule. Since succession in Saudi Arabia passed from older to younger brother before MBS, he was concerned that the people he arrested threatened his succession. Though MBS is crown prince, the king of Saudi Arabia is still alive, just old and in failing health. Bin Salman only let the group of prominent Saudis go after they either paid billions or gave up part of their businesses to the state. In other words, to him. Some family members remained under house arrest, possibly still remaining there today. Analysts estimate that the Saudi government obtained over $100 billion from those arrests. Sorry, anti-corruption sweeps. Bin Salman imposes his will beyond his borders as well. In November 2017, he was visited by Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri. Most state visits consist of photo ops and lots of awkward handshaking, but this one went off script. For no apparent reason, al-Hariri suddenly announced his resignation as prime minister of his country. He then stayed in Saudi Arabia for a suspicious length of time, leading many to believe he was there against his will. After a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron, al-Hariri was returned to Lebanon, the country he was prime minister of, and immediately reversed his resignation. Though many suspected what had happened, bin Salman was so unafraid of consequences that he actually joked about kidnapping al-Hariri at an investment conference a year later. As far as his progressive reforms go, MBS has made some changes, including giving women the right to drive. To counter that, he imprisoned women's rights advocates that agitated for those rights, keeping them in jail to this day. He also opened up movie theaters in Saudi Arabia and allowed international concerts, while also executing way more people than the country did before. It's a weird one step forward to reform, two steps back to the Middle Ages. Amnesty International said, Saudi Arabia retains an atrocious human rights record, and the situation's only deteriorated since MBS was appointed as official heir to the throne in June 2017. In 2024, the country executed between 198 and 304 people, depending on the source, the highest number recorded since 1990. Executions are used as a tool of revenge and fear for any critics of the government, including the Shia minority that protests their treatment within the country. MBS also changed Saudi policy in 2022 to reintroduce executions as punishment for drug-related crimes, and these have mostly been used against foreigners, particularly from Egypt and Jordan, who account for 75% of all drug crime-related executions, after trials that most international observers feel fall short of fair. For all the reasons listed, MBS is a dangerous dictator, one who presents a modern, progressive face to the world to gain acceptance, while hiding darker happenings in his country. Number 3. Gerbanguli Berde Mukamidov, Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is, well, weird. It's one of those dictatorships that's so weird it would almost be funny if it wasn't also very, very repressive and sad. The current dictator, Gerbanguli Berde Mukamidov, started off in an unexpected career as a dentist. So how does a man go from telling you to floss to ordering 20-foot gold statues of their favorite dog breed built in the nation's capital? Well, it doesn't help that Turkmenistan has been ruled by dictators who like to develop huge cults of personality for years. And Berde Mukamidov got his start in government as a health minister under his predecessor, Sapar Murat Niyazov. Besides erecting rotating gold statues of himself on horseback in the capital of Ashgabat, Niyazov was also known for writing a book called the Runama, or the Book of the Soul. Now, you might think that writing a book isn't so bad, and no matter how nonsensical or badly written it is, you're right, it's not that bad. Well, until the ruler starts putting it in schools across the country and forcing all students and government employees to read it. Oh, and there's also a quiz on it as a part of everyone's driving test. So if you want a driver's license, you need to know what your local dictator has to say about souls over the course of 2 volumes. So Turkmenistan has already been set up with, shall we say, self-involved dictators. Then in 2006, when Niyazov died and Berde Mukamidov came into power, he decided that he was done with Niyazov's cult of personality. Instead, he would create his own cult of personality. Berde Mukamidov makes himself look cool to his citizens by doing taekwondo, riding horses, car racing, or even DJing at a New Year's rave. He also starts vendettas against anything he feels like, meaning the entire country has to bend to his whim of the day. Some vendettas are understandable in a totalitarian kind of way, like his war on satellite dishes, because the way in which Berde Mukamidov is most like Kim Jong-un is in trying to make his country a complete black box, sealed off from the outside world. For a ruler who wants to completely control the flow of information, citizens getting access to info from the outside is a problem. So satellite dishes were abolished. But then he also declared war on air conditioners, which was slightly less understandable. But apparently Berde Mukamidov has very strict standards about how his capital, Ashgabat, should be. He thought that external AC units were messing up the city's look, and he ordered them all removed. For the same reason, he legislated that no colored or dirty cars can enter the capital. Only white cars are allowed to drive the streets. So if you visit Ashgabat, which after this description we can't see why you would find dozens of car washes by the entrances to the city. Luka Ancheski, political scientist and senior lecturer of the Central Asian Studies Department at the University of Glasgow, has thoughts on the situation in Turkmenistan. Gerbanguli Berde Mukamidov is a megalomaniac. This is a guy who wants to be seen as an untouchable demigod. Under Berde Mukamidov, Turkmenistan has become one of the least free places on earth. In 2019, it placed below North Korea in the World Press Freedom Ranking. Turkmenistani journalists who have fled the country are subject to threats, and some have even forcibly been deported back to Turkmenistan to get thrown in jail. Any reporters within the country who disagreed with the government have, well, mostly disappeared after closed-door trials. To prevent any of its citizens from seeing that perhaps there is a less repressive way to live, Berde Mukamidov's regime strictly controls travel outside of the country. Even travel within the country is restricted. He constantly churns out propaganda to tell people who live on around $400 a month or 1,400 Turkmenistani manats minimum wage that things are actually going great. As to how the population is really doing besides the announced minimum wage, well, we don't really know because not a single outside group has been given access to observe issues on the ground, like poverty and food access. For some people, things are going great, but those people are Berde Mukamidov and his inner circle. The regime is incredibly corrupt, and those at the top reap the rewards. To be fair, Berde Mukamidov does occasionally give back to his people, like when he made a gold statue of himself on horseback holding a dove, something he insisted the people of Turkmenistan overwhelmingly wanted. Then again, living in Turkmenistan means that what you want better align with what your leader wants, or else. The Turkmen Initiative for Human Rights said that in June of 2022, hundreds of people needed medical attention after they were forced to attend a jubilee for Berde Mukamidov in 116.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, Gerbanguli has technically resigned as leader to hand the reins to his son, but after a year, his son ended up appointing Berde Mukamidov to chairman of the People's Council, making him national leader of the Turkmen people. Of course, there are also dictators whose human rights abuses have now become infamous all over the world. Number 2. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been in power for 35 years. His regime came to international attention lately after protests for women's rights and human rights in general erupted across Iran. During the revolution of 1979, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini was swept into power via a referendum on the promise of removing Western influence from Iran and creating a more effective government. However, he quickly betrayed a lot of the groups that had supported him. Khomeini immediately imposed incredibly repressive laws on the Iranian population, particularly women, using a fundamentalist interpretation of Sharia law. After Khomeini died in 1989, the second Ayatollah, Khamenei, who could have picked a name that didn't sound so similar for the purposes of this episode, came into power and continued enforcing those repressive rules. These included compulsory hijab for women, so their head will be covered, no same-sex activity, anyone caught is punished by flogging, and for men, death, and no dancing in public. Authorities chased down 5 teen girls after they uploaded a video of themselves dancing in an apartment block, forcing them to confess to their sinful behavior in a video while properly covered up. They also sentenced 2 bloggers, a couple, to 10.5 years in prison for dancing together in the street. The exact charges were, quote, encouraging corruption and public prostitution, which seems like a stretch. In fact, the word dancing can't even be used in media reports without the reporters facing punishment. The ban on seemingly any form of personal expression, freedom of speech, or general fun in Iran is maintained by the hated morality police, formerly known as the Gashti Ershad or Guidance Patrol. In 2022, austerity measures caused protests to sweep the country. President Ebrahim Raisi, who is still subservient to the Ayatollah, ordered the morality police to patrol the streets in order to break up groups and break people's spirits. This backfired when they arrested Mahsa Amini, an Iranian Kurdish woman, for improperly wearing her hijab and then causing her death. Because Mahsa Amini was Kurdish, after her death, many Kurdish lawyers and other community leaders were arrested for having any connection to her, her family, or promising legal defense. The supreme leader of Iran is particularly harsh with the country's minorities, including those of the Baha'i faith, who are not allowed to practice their religion and regularly have their businesses shut down by the government. This also applies to Sunni Muslims, Arabs, Baluchis, Azeris, and of course Kurds who can't catch a break anywhere. The Ayatollah also dealt with ensuing women, life, and freedom protests that erupted across the country harshly. The security forces arrested thousands of protesters, torturing many, assaulting others, and killing some as well. Prominent protesters and artists supporting the protesters are captured and thrown into the highly feared Evin prison, often tortured in sadistic ways and held in solitary confinement. Famous Iranians like actress Taraneh Ali-Dousti and rapper Toumaj Salehi were imprisoned there after supporting the women, life, and freedom movement. Salehi was finally released after 1 year, his death sentence reversed after a lot of international attention and pressure. At least 1,400 people have officially been executed as a result of the protests, with untold numbers of others arrested, assaulted, and detained. In the meantime, women in Iran continue to experience severe oppression, both inside and outside of the home. This is partly due to the encouragement of rampant gender abuse and discrimination in the country. The Research Center on Women and Family in Tehran recently found that Iran holds the world record for domestic violence. 66% of Iranian women experience domestic violence in their lifetime. The feared Iranian security forces continue to crack down swiftly and violently on almost everyone who expressed discontent with living in Iran. This covers groups from peacefully protesting municipal workers asking for their wages to be paid to student activists asking for an investigation into the poisoning of dozens of Iranian schoolgirls. Though the woman life freedom movement is ongoing, the Ayatollah continues to repress it and has reversed any seeming progress made. After rumors that the government might review the laws regarding hijab and the morality police, neither was removed from government. For now, the people of Iran, particularly its women and minorities, continue to live in fear. Now, how could anyone be worse than the Ayatollah in Iran? Well, by amassing a much higher kill count of their own citizens. Number 1. Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela. Venezuela has been experiencing a humanitarian and financial crisis of epic proportions for years now. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled the country, and citizens are so food insecure that the average Venezuelan had lost 24 pounds in 2017. According to the World Food Program, a full 59% of Venezuelans can't afford enough food. And a big part of the blame for Venezuela's downfall is on its 53rd president, Nicolas Maduro Moros. Though Maduro might have started out as a fairly elected president in 2013, he has since dismantled democracy, seized full power, and wrecked the Venezuelan economy and society. To be a little fair, Venezuela's economic woes did not start with Maduro. The country is overly reliant on its oil industry, meaning that the economic health of Venezuela rises and falls based on the global price of oil. To be less fair to Maduro, his government has completely mismanaged the industry and prosecuted any critics or political opponents who have pointed this out. According to NGO Provea, over 10,000 people have been murdered in extrajudicial killings during his reign. The UN Office of the High Commission of Human Rights found evidence of even more suspicious deaths, recording 19,000 killings between 2016 and 2019 that were justified with resistance to authority. The Human Rights Watch has uncovered evidence that the Venezuelan police units, known as the Special Actions Forces or FAES, have been entering poor neighborhoods that no longer support Maduro and executing those opposed to his government. In a sick twist, these raids are called Operations to Liberate the People. Maduro might not be fully responsible for Venezuela's economic issues, but he has done everything he can to worsen them. This includes murdering thousands of people and starving millions more, leading a huge chunk of its population to flee. In the meantime, he and his family have been making themselves rich off the backs of his increasingly desperate people. On July 25, 2019, the U.S. sanctioned Maduro and his 3 stepsons, as well as a handful of other people and related companies, after they uncovered a huge network of bribery and money laundering, funneling money back to the Venezuelan dictator. One Venezuelan for free food distribution program, known as CLAP, was used to steal money from the country's starving people in order to enrich the ruling party. Maduro has also embezzled billions from the state, and therefore the Venezuelan people, including directly taking gold from the Venezuelan central bank, a move straight out of a 60s Bond villain playbook. The intimidation and killing of those who oppose Maduro, combined with the massive wealth accumulated by his family while Venezuelan citizens starve, makes his dictatorship just as oppressive, if not worse, than North Korea's. Which regimes do you think are the most oppressive in the world today? Drop your thoughts below. Now go check out A Day in the Life of North Korean Dictator Kim Jong-un, or click on this video instead.